The 1960s didn't just produce great music and questionable fashion choices. They produced the most dangerous, most exhilarating, most gloriously irresponsible machines ever to roll off an American assembly line. Today we're ranking 12 of the fastest muscle cars of the decade by the only number that truly mattered at the time: the quarter mile. Not horsepower ratings, which manufacturers lied about constantly and shamelessly. Not top speed. Not how good it looked parked outside a diner. The quarter mile. Because that's where legends were made, reputations were destroyed, and occasionally, entire paychecks disappeared on a single bad bet. Number 12. The 1969 Mercury Cyclone, spoiler 2 with the 428 Cobra jet. Here's a name that doesn't come up at car shows very often: Mercury. Not exactly a brand that makes your heart race, right? And that's exactly what made the Cyclone Spoiler 2 so dangerous. Nobody saw it coming, and by the time they figured out what was parked next to them at the stoplight, it was already gone. Mercury built the Cyclone Spoiler 2 for one reason: NASCAR. The rules required manufacturers to build a certain number of street-legal versions before they could campaign a car on the big tracks. So, Mercury obliged, bolting on a unique extended nose cone and a reworked front end that actually reduced drag at high speed. The aerodynamics weren't just for show. At sustained highway speeds, this thing sliced through the air in ways that standard muscle cars simply couldn't. But the real weapon was hiding under the hood. The 428 cubic inch Cobra jet V8, officially made 335 horsepower. Officially. Real-world testing told a completely different story, with output closer to 400 horses once you actually put it on a dyno and stopped pretending. Combined with the Cyclone's relatively lean curb weight, the result was a quarter-mile time hovering around 13.9 seconds at 103 miles per hour. For a Mercury. A Mercury. Nobody expected that. And that surprise factor was worth more on the street than any amount of hood scoops or racing stripes. The Cyclone Spoiler 2 proved that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one wearing the most boring name badge. Number 11. The 1968 Dodge Dart GTS with the 440. Let's talk about what happens when an engineer looks at a compact car and thinks, you know what this needs? A massive big block engine that has absolutely no business being in here. The result was the Dodge Dart GTS with the 440 cubic inch V8, and it was one of the most terrifying things Dodge ever built. Not because it was sophisticated, because it absolutely was not. The 440 produced 375 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque in a car that weighed just over 3,000 pounds. You do that math and you arrive at a power-to-weight ratio that should have required a warning label on the window sticker. 0 to 60 happened in under 6 seconds. The quarter mile disappeared in around 13.8 seconds at 104 miles per hour. Now, here's the thing. Nobody tells you about the Dart GTS with the 440. The front suspension was never designed to carry that engine. The nose got heavy, the steering got vague, and the rear end developed a personality all its own under hard acceleration. A personality best described as wildly unpredictable. Dodge essentially took a sensible compact car, stuffed it full of rage, and handed the keys to whoever could afford it. On the drag strip, it was a weapon. On a winding road, it was a negotiation, but straight-line speed was never in question. And the Dart GTS with the 440 remains one of the purest expressions of the hot rod philosophy that muscle car era ever produced. Take something small, install something enormous, accept the consequences. Number 10. The 1969 Plymouth Roadrunner with the 440 six-pack. Plymouth's whole idea with the Roadrunner was simple: maximum performance, minimum everything else. No carpet if you didn't want it, rubber floor mats, basic bench seat, a horn that went beep beep, because Plymouth actually licensed the cartoon character and thought that was a good idea. And honestly, it was a great idea. The Roadrunner was the muscle car stripped down to its core purpose, and the 440 six-pack took that philosophy and set it on fire. Six-pack didn't mean 6 cylinders. It meant 3 two-barrel Holley carburetors sitting on an aluminum intake manifold feeding 440 cubic inches of pure Mopar aggression. The center carburetor handled everyday driving. The outboard, too, kicked in the moment your right foot got ambitious. And when they opened up, the whole character of the car transformed instantly. One moment you were cruising, the next moment you were holding on. Factory rated at 390 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque, the six-pack Roadrunner ran the quarter mile in the 13.5-second range at around 105 miles per hour. For a car that cost under $4,000 fully loaded, those numbers were borderline offensive to every expensive sports car on the planet. The Roadrunner proved that you didn't need Italian leather or European engineering to be genuinely fast. You needed 3 carburetors, 400 cubic inches, and absolutely zero interest in refinement. Plymouth built a cartoon car that nobody was laughing at from behind. Number 9, the 1969 Pontiac GTO Judge with the Ram Air 4. Pontiac invented the muscle car formula in 1964. The GTO was the car that started the whole war. Mid-size body, big block engine, affordable price, instant legend. By '69, every manufacturer had copied the formula, refined it, and tried to outmuscle Pontiac at their own game. So, Pontiac responded with the Judge, which, if you think about it, was a car named after a laugh-in television sketch. Pontiac was fun like that. But the Ram Air 4 option was anything but a joke. The 400 cubic inch V8 with the Ram Air 4 package received specially ported cylinder heads, a hot camshaft profile, and free-flowing exhaust manifolds that transformed it from a strong street engine into something closer to a racing motor with turn signals. Pontiac listed it at 370 horsepower. Independent testing consistently found numbers closer to 430 horses at the crank. The factory was, once again, being modest in the most self-serving way possible. Quarter-mile times for the Ram Air 4. Judge hovered in the 13.4-second range at around 107 miles per hour. That put it firmly in the company of the most feared machines of the era: Hemis, LS engines, Cobra jets, and it did so in a car that wore outrageous colors and graphics that made it look like it was trying to win a beauty contest and a drag race simultaneously. Pontiac only built around 350 Ram Air 4 Judges in 1969. Which means if you find one today, you found something genuinely special, a muscle car that proved the inventor of the formula hadn't forgotten how to write it. Number 8, the 1967 Plymouth GTX with the 426 Hemi. Plymouth positioned the GTX as the gentleman's muscle car. Premium interior, standard equipment that other manufacturers charged extra for, bucket seats, heavy-duty suspension. The marketing wanted you to think of it as sophisticated, refined. Then you checked the box for the 426 Hemi, and sophistication walked out the door and didn't look back. The Hemi was many things. Tractable was not one of them. Below 3,000 RPM, it loped and stumbled and made you wonder if it was actually running properly. Above 3,000 RPM, it transformed into something that scared the people who built it. Those dual 4-barrel carburetors opened up. The solid lifter camshaft started screaming, and the GTX lunged forward with a violence that caught even experienced drivers genuinely off guard. Factory rated at 425 horsepower, a number everyone knew was conservative by a significant margin. The Hemi GTX ran the quarter mile in the 13.3-second range at around 106 miles per hour. It could run low 13-second passes with a driver who understood its personality. And the Hemi absolutely had a personality, demanding, temperamental, unforgiving of inattention. Brilliant when everything was right. The smart money went for the 440 Super Commando, which offered massive torque from lower RPM and required far less maintenance. But the smart money was never the point. The Hemi was the point. Sometimes you order the difficult option because it's worth every complicated second. Number 7. The 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. Ford didn't build the Boss 429 because they wanted to. They built it because NASCAR rules required them to. To run the 429 cubic inch engine on the big tracks, Ford had to produce a street-legal version in sufficient numbers. The result was one of the greatest accidental street cars ever created. Getting the 429 into the Mustang's engine bay was not a simple task. The engine was enormous. The shock towers had to be modified. The battery relocated to the trunk to make room. Every car was individually hand-fitted by Car Craft, a Michigan contractor doing work that the Ford assembly line simply couldn't accommodate. Each Boss 429 was essentially a custom-built machine hiding behind a production car price tag. The engine featured semi-hemispherical combustion chambers, enormous valves, and internals that had more in common with a NASCAR motor than anything Ford officially sold to the public. The factory rating was 375 horsepower. Real-world output was somewhere considerably north of 500. Quarter-mile times ran in the 13.1-second range at around 107 miles per hour bone stock, and minor tuning dropped those times into the 12s without much argument. The handling was a separate conversation entirely. All that engine weight sitting forward of the front axle made the Boss 429 a handful in corners, with understeer that required planning and respect. But in a straight line, this was a Mustang that fulfilled every promise the name ever made and then kept going. Ford built a race car. They just forgot to mention it. Number 6. The 1968 Dodge Charger with the 426 Hemi. If you ask someone to close their eyes and picture a 1960s muscle car, there's a reasonable chance they'd describe the 1968 Dodge Charger. That fastback roofline, those hidden headlights, the full-width taillights, the Coke bottle rear fenders. It was one of the most visually perfect automotive designs the decade produced, and Dodge had the good sense to stuff the most feared engine in America underneath it. The 426 Hemi and the Charger created something that was both a cultural monument and a genuine weapon. On the street, it turned heads before it ever moved a foot. On the drag strip, it moved considerably faster than that. Quarter-mile times for the Hemi Charger ran around 13.0 seconds flat at approximately 108 miles per hour. Numbers that made serious racers pay attention and made insurance companies reach for their rate increase forms. Because here's the thing about the Charger that people sometimes forget in all the celebration of its looks. It was not an easy car to drive quickly. That tunneled rear window created aerodynamic turbulence. The recessed grille caused front-end lift at speed. The handling was challenging, with a heavy nose and rear suspension that could step out with minimal encouragement. Dodge would address these issues later, with the Charger 500 and then the Daytona. But the 68 model didn't need aerodynamic perfection. It had the Hemi, and it had that face. Sometimes that's enough. Number 5. The 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1. Here's where the story gets strange. And by strange, I mean Chevrolet built 69 of these. 69. In a production year, when they made tens of thousands of standard Camaros, the ZL1 was not a variant. It was barely an admission. A secret that Chevrolet told only to the people who already knew to ask. The engine was an all-aluminum 427 cubic inch big block that weighed nearly 100 pounds less than the iron block version. That saved weight came out of the nose, improving weight distribution and making the Camaro feel more alive than any V8-powered car had a right to feel. The official horsepower rating was 430, which was the biggest single lie in a decade full of them. Conservative estimates put real output closer to 550 horsepower. Some believe it touched 600 with the right tuning. Chevrolet wasn't saying. Quarter-mile times hovered around 12.6 seconds at 110 miles per hour right off the showroom floor. With minimal preparation, nothing that would disqualify it from stock competition, times dipped into the 11s. The National Hot Rod Association took one look at the ZL1's performance and reclassified it immediately, effectively banning it from competing against standard Camaros. It was too fast for its own class. It was too expensive for most buyers. Over $7,500, which was more than 2 standard Corvettes. Dealers didn't want to stock them. Insurance companies didn't want to cover them. Chevrolet built the ZL1 because a handful of racers demanded it and the rules required it. What they accidentally created was the single most extreme Camaro in the model's entire history. 69 examples, every single one a legend. Number 4. The 1969 Chevrolet Corvette L88. America's sports car had always been fast, but the L88 option turned the Corvette into something that the factory actively tried to talk you out of buying. That's not an exaggeration. Chevrolet included language in the documentation, specifically warning potential buyers that the L88 was not suitable for street use. They didn't want casual drivers discovering what this engine actually did. The 427 cubic inch L88 featured aluminum cylinder heads, an aggressive solid lifter camshaft, and an 11:1 compression ratio that demanded premium racing fuel, the kind that regular gas stations didn't carry in 1969. Run pump gas, and the engine would detonate so violently it could damage itself. The factory rating was 430 horsepower. Chevrolet kept that number deliberately low to avoid regulatory attention. Real output was closer to 560 horses, tested on engines destined for racing applications. Quarter-mile times for the L88 Corvette ran around 12.8 seconds at 112 miles per hour. Extraordinary numbers for a production car of any era, let alone 1969. Top speed and proper gearing exceeded 170 miles per hour, making the L88 among the fastest production vehicles available anywhere on the planet. Chevrolet built approximately 216 L88 Corvettes in 1969. Most of them went directly to racing programs. The ones that ended up on the street demanded skill, premium fuel, regular maintenance, and a complete absence of self-preservation instinct. They were among the most rewarding and most dangerous vehicles the decade produced. Today, a clean L88 Corvette approaches $500,000 because some cars earn their price. Number 3. The 1969 Dodge Charger 500 with the Hemi. Before the Daytona arrived with its winged insanity, Dodge took a more surgical approach to the problem of going faster on NASCAR's high banks. The Charger 500 addressed the two biggest aerodynamic flaws of the standard '68 Charger, that recessed grille and that tunneled rear window. By simply eliminating them, the grille was replaced with a flush-mounted unit borrowed from the Coronet. The rear window cavity was filled in, creating a smooth, fastback profile that dramatically reduced drag. The changes looked almost subtle compared to what was coming, but on the track they produced measurable results, allowing the Charger 500 to approach and exceed 190 miles per hour on the super speedways. NASCAR officials started paying very close attention. On the street, the Hemi-powered Charger 500 was something different again. That 426 cubic inch engine producing its real-world 500 horsepower in a car weighing nearly 4,000 pounds created straight-line performance that was genuinely shocking. Quarter-mile times ran in the 12.5-second range at around 113 miles per hour, numbers that put the Charger 500 ahead of almost everything else wearing a production license plate. But the momentum that came with that weight was not a trivial concern. The brakes, front discs, and rear drums were marginal for the speeds this car could reach. The steering required multiple turns lock to lock. Emergency maneuvers happened slowly, while the car's mass continued doing exactly what it intended to do, which was go forward, fast. Dodge built around 500 Charger 500s to meet homologation requirements. Each one proved that aerodynamics and brute force were not mutually exclusive, they were complementary. And together, they were terrifying. Number 2. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. Some of you are going to look at this placement and want to argue with me. Go ahead. I'll wait. The Hemi Cuda sits at number 2 on this list because its quarter-mile credentials are extraordinary, its rarity is legendary, and its reputation has only grown larger with every passing decade. Plymouth built 652 of them in 1970, which felt like a lot until you tried to buy one and discovered what the insurance premium looked like. The 426 Hemi in the Barracuda body created one of the most concentrated doses of straight-line violence the muscle car era ever produced. 425 horsepower from the factory. Closer to 500 in reality, as we have established that factory horsepower ratings in the late 60s were essentially creative writing exercises. Quarter-mile times ran in the 13.2-second range at around 108 miles per hour for street-driven examples, with prepared cars running deep into the 12s. The challenge, and there was always a challenge with a Hemi Cuda, was everything that happened when the road curved. The short 108-inch wheelbase made weight transfer dramatic and sudden. Over 60% of the car's weight sat over the front axle, creating understeer right up until the moment you lifted the throttle in a corner, at which point the rear tires would break loose with a suddenness that required reflexes most drivers didn't actually possess. It was a car that separated the confident from the genuinely skilled in a hurry. Drag racing organizations moved the Hemi Cuda into higher competition classes almost immediately. Insurance companies either refused to write policies or priced them so high that most buyers walked away. Plymouth had built something that the world wasn't entirely sure how to handle. Today, a numbers-matching Hemi Cuda sells for over $3 million. The market understood something the insurance actuaries never quite did: that being too extreme for your own era is exactly how you become immortal. Number 1. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona with the Hemi. And here we are. The car that looked like it was designed by someone who had never heard the word compromise. The car that broke 200 miles per hour on an American oval track. The car that NASCAR banned because they had no other option. The 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. Dodge had looked at the Charger 500 and thought, good start, not enough. So they added an 18-inch extended nose cone that pointed at the horizon like a declaration of intent. They bolted a towering rear wing that stood nearly 2 feet above the trunk lid, positioned high enough so the trunk could still open, which was either thoughtful engineering or the funniest design constraint in automotive history, depending on your perspective. The wing looked like something off a racing aircraft. On a car, you could theoretically drive to the grocery store. Theoretically. The 426 Hemi, under that extraordinary hood, produced its customary 500 real-world horsepower, fed through either a 4-speed manual or the TorqueFlite automatic. Quarter-mile times for the Hemi Daytona ran in the 12.3-second range at around 115 miles per hour, the fastest factory quarter-mile times of any production muscle car the 1960s produced. On the NASCAR superspeedways, Buddy Baker used a Daytona to become the first driver in history to officially clock 200 miles per hour in a stock car during a test run at Talladega in 1970. 200 miles per hour. In something that started life as a Dodge Charger. NASCAR responded the only way they could. They banned it. New rules for 1971 restricted engine sizes for any car carrying aerodynamic modifications, effectively killing the winged warriors before they made competition pointless. Dodge built 503 Daytonas to satisfy homologation requirements. Most of them sat unsold on dealer lots because regular buyers thought the nose was too long and the wing was too tall. Some dealers removed the wings and nose cones entirely just to move the inventory. Those modified cars are now considered one of the great automotive tragedies because an original unaltered Daytona is worth $500,000 or more today. The people who passed on it in 1969 because it looked too strange would like a word with their younger selves. The Charger. Daytona wasn't just the fastest muscle car of the 1960s. It was the proof that Detroit had pushed the formula as far as it could possibly go, past the point where racing organizations could allow it to continue, past the point where insurance companies could reasonably respond, past the point where common sense had any business being involved at all. It was the apex, the exclamation point at the end of the most extraordinary decade in American automotive history. And it looked absolutely magnificent doing it. 12 cars, 12 quarter-mile legends. And what's remarkable, what's genuinely worth sitting with for a moment, is that every single one of these machines was street legal. You could walk into a dealership, sign the paperwork, and drive one of these off the lot. No special license, no racing credentials, no proof that you had any idea what you were about to unleash. The 1960s were a different time in every possible way. Engineers built first and asked questions later. horsepower was the only metric that truly moved the needle, and the quarter mile was the ultimate democracy, the place where reputation, price tag, and brand loyalty meant nothing compared to elapsed time and trap speed. These weren't just fast cars. They were a generation's definition of freedom: loud, dangerous, gloriously excessive, and completely unapologetic about every one of those qualities. They scared insurance companies, overwhelmed tires, terrified passengers, and created a legacy that enthusiasts are still chasing 6 decades later. Which one would you have driven? Which one would have driven you into a guardrail?